Okay, so now I'm going to go over how I would quickly put a PC build together, and we're going to do a gaming PC that is comparable to next gen consoles, or specifically the Xbox Series X. Now, I was on Rich at Review Tech USA, his stream last night, and he said that it would cost around $1,100 or $1,200 to build a computer that would be similar to the Xbox Series X. And he's pretty much right. So, what you want to do is go to a website called PC Part Picker. And I think most people know about this. And we're going to select System Builder, which I've already done that here. And as you can see, now we have the list of all of our components over here, and it gives us an option to choose our components. Now, if we're going to build a gaming PC that's similar to Xbox Series X, we need to choose a video card that has the same or similar compute performance as what has been reported by Microsoft. So we need to get the GeForce RTX 2080 Super. So we'll select that in our options here. And it is an expensive card. You'll notice there's a handful of different manufacturers that make this particular GPU. And if you look across the top here, it tells us the chipset. They're all 2080 Super. That's the type of card it is. The memory, they're all 8 gigabytes. It's an 8 gigabyte card. The core clock, which is the frequency that it operates, because it is a separate processor from the from the CPU in your computer, and its boost clock, and how it connects to the motherboard PCI Express 16 pin. So we need to select which one we're going with. Now, they all have similar specs, but they don't all cost the same. I suspect that the reason for that is to do with the cooling fans that the manufacturer put on the card. So let's get something that isn't going to break the bank here. Of course, this is going to, excuse me, this is going to break the bank anyway. Here we go, the Gigabyte WindForce OC. This will work, so we'll just add this in. Okay. We also know we want relatively fast storage because the storage inside the Xbox Series X is also going to be very fast. It has a fast data transfer rate. We're going to go down here and select on interface. We want to try to avoid SATA 6 because, as I explained in the other video, it's not as fast as M2. So we want to go with M2. And this one is probably going to be the least expensive, 1 terabyte of storage. And a terabyte is pretty much what you want for gaming because games take up many gigabytes of data. Some of the bigger games are even hitting 100 gigabytes, which is just insane. So we'll add that in. So we've got our storage and our video card. Prices are over here. If you scroll down, you can see the current total. We already have a discount on something, so we're already at over $800. But that's mainly because of this GPU here. All right, so let's select our CPU. This is where Rich and I are going to probably somewhat disagree. Long story short, when developers are making games, they use an interface called DirectX. And this helps them optimize the game for the way that it goes through the processor. And right now with DirectX version 12, which is what we have, it can really only take advantage of 6 cores. If you go to 8 cores, it's fine, but you're spending more money for not really a good reason. Now, is there going to be a version of DirectX down the road that will be able to take better advantage of 8 cores? I'm sure there will be, but right now there is not. So, in my opinion, I would go with a good solid 6-core CPU. So what we need to do is go over here and go to core count and make that 6. All right, so up the top, core count 6. Core clock, the speed, how fast it's going to process the data and run the numbers. The 3600X here, Ryzen 5 from AMD, is a well-known CPU, and it is fast. But so is the i5-9600K right here at 3.7 gigahertz. So how do we know which one to get? Well, we can go over here and look at the price and see which one's cheaper. The Ryzen 5 is a little bit cheaper. So is it worth it to get the 9600K, even though it costs a little bit much or a little bit more? This is where the second website that I like to use comes in, called Passmark.com. Passmark, they use their own benchmarking tools to sort of measure the performance of CPUs, GPUs, hard drives, RAM, all of that stuff. So we're going to go to their CPU site. And if over here you can click on the scales and compare up to 3 different CPUs. We could just look at their list, but it would take too long to go down the list and find those 2 CPUs on the list. So we'll just type them in right here. AMD Ryzen 5 3600X. It appears right at the top. And then we'll go Intel Core. You have to type all of this in specifically too, or it won't show up. i5 9600K. And then click compare. And it gives us all of their specs down here. And here's the rating, the CPU mark rating that they came up with. This one is over 18,000. This one's 11,000. That's according to these numbers, the 3600X is the better processor. And I suspect it has to do with this. Remember how I talked about in the previous video that some of these cores may have 2 threads where during their idle times they can send 2 sets of information in at a time. And the Ryzen 5 3600X has that, 2 threads per core. So you've got 6 cores and 12 threads going on. Meanwhile, the 9600K over here is just 6 cores, no multi-threading. So this has really made the decision for us, particularly since the Ryzen 5 3600X is cheaper. So we'll go ahead and go with that. Add that. Okay. All right, so now we've got GPU, we've got the storage, we've got the CPU that we're going to use. Now we need to find a compatible motherboard for this CPU. Now it's important to understand that CPUs have been designed over the years with different socket types. So if you have an old computer, you can't just simply get a new CPU and expect it to work, because the motherboard will probably be and have an outdated socket that isn't being used anymore, and therefore the CPU won't work, may not even fit in it. Fortunately, this website has a compatibility filter, and it will only show us motherboards that fit the socket type for the CPU that we've selected. In this case, AMD's AM4 socket. So we see the socket type and we see the form factor. ATX is the standard size, but they have smaller sizes if you don't want your computer to be that big. Micro ATX is smaller. I believe is there mini? Yes, there's also mini ITX, which is even smaller yet. Now, personally, I don't like to have my PCs taking up a lot of real estate on the shelf, so I'll probably would go with the micro ATX if I had to. And for reasons I will explain here in just a moment, I'm going to select this MSI B450 Pro. It's only $80, so this isn't one of the more expensive components we have. Now here you see the compatibility warnings show up, even though it was on the compatible list. So if we scroll down, we can read what it's telling us. It says some AMD B450 chipset motherboards may need a BIOS update. BIOS is just basically the menu and the setup of the motherboard, because your motherboard has a menu that you can go into and fiddle with fan speed and boot order and things like that. But that's getting more into the software side of things. So it's telling us that it may need to update that menu, that BIOS. I happen to know that this particular motherboard does not need that update. And in fact, you can Google this problem and probably get a list of motherboards that don't need to be updated. So if you are using a modern Ryzen 5 CPU in a build, you might want to check on that and Google that just to make sure you're selecting one that doesn't need a BIOS update. Or you can select one anyway and then Google how to do the BIOS update. I'm not going to go over that here because I don't want this video to be that long. Okay, so we'll go with this motherboard. Okay, now we need to choose our RAM, and as I explained in the other video, right now we are dealing with DDR4 RAM. DDR4 can have a few different speeds. This one's at 3000 megahertz. This is 3200. It's a little bit faster. It actually goes up to 3600, which is faster than some of the lists I was looking at even showed. Let's go ahead and add Corsair Vengeance, and it's got good ratings, and it's fairly inexpensive for 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is actually what you need. Also important to look at over here, modules. There are 2 sticks of RAM and each one is 8, so you have to put them both in. And then there's whether or not the motherboard has dual channel, but that would be more for a video where I'm actually building and putting the thing together. I'm not going to actually buy these parts and do this. This is just an example. All right, so we've got all of our main internal components. Now let's take a look at our wattage. We're at 429. This is telling us, how much power is required to run all of these components. Now, a good rule of thumb when you're selecting a power supply is to go with the idea that the power that is required should be 70% of the power of the PSU or power supply unit that you're actually going to buy. And in this case, we would want about a 650 watt power supply for what we want. Excuse me. And you can go down the list and look at the prices. Over here we have, they're all ATX, and then they have efficiency ratings. There's bronze, there's gold, and I believe there's also platinum, titanium. There's titanium, which is better than gold. This just kind of gives you, this is the efficiency rating. And the more efficient the power supply is, the cooler it is going to run and not generate so much heat. Also over here, It's telling us whether or not it is modular. Modular just means whether or not the cables will plug in individually from the power supply to the component that it needs to. For example, you have to plug a cable from the motherboard into the, excuse me, I'm having a brain fart, from the motherboard into the power supply. If it is not a modular power supply, that is just going to be one cable coming out of a hole out of the box. You can see here that's it's just a box and there are cables coming out. So somewhere at the end of that cable would be a plug for the motherboard, and then there would be other plugs coming off of it as well for other things like a CD drive or what else would it? Oh yes, the GPU probably requires its own power source as well from the power supply. So semi or fully modular is easier to work with, but you can certainly go with a non-modular and it would work just the same. So if we go down the list, I'm just going to select one that isn't incredibly expensive because this is already becoming an expensive machine. I'm going to bring this down to 650. Okay, now we're only seeing 650 watt power supplies. And then we can sort by price. Cheap, 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 cheap. And as you can see, none of these cheapest ones are modular, but then we have EVGA BQ 80 plus bronze efficiency rating, which is fine, but it is semi-modular. Well, I can deal with that, so I'm going to go with that. So we've got our power supply. All right. So we have to put all of these things in a case, or not, but you definitely risk damaging these parts if you don't put them in a case. So yeah, we need to put it in a case. So I'm going to select a case, and the micro ATX board that we've selected will fit in any of these cases, even if the case is, a lot bigger. But this one right here, the Cooler Master Master Box, which is, kind of an economy case for a computer, it's smallish, but, it's easy to work in, or at least it looks easy anyway. So we'll go ahead and add that. Cooler Master is a good brand. Should get decent airflow through all of the parts. Airflow is important because if any of these parts begin to overheat, they will malfunction or completely shut the computer down entirely. So let's take a look at the grand total we're at right now, $1,285.91. So like I said, Rich was pretty much right in terms of what it takes to build a PC. Now, there are parts you can skimp out on here if you choose to. For instance, you could probably find a cheaper power supply. You can probably find, well, you might be able to find cheaper RAM. I didn't look very hard. But you definitely want that terabyte of storage. You definitely want this card if you want to be on par with the Xbox Series X. Now, let's say you're willing to go, okay, maybe we don't want to be exactly on par with Xbox Series X. Maybe we want to go down just a little bit, maybe save a few dollars. Well, that's where we can go back to Passmark now. And this time we're going to look at video card benchmarks. And we'll just go to the high-end list. We're going to find the 2080 Super pretty close to the top of the list. Yeah, there it is. $700. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll look at these prices and we'll go down the list a little bit. $499. What have we here? This saves us $200 if we get this one instead. The Passmark rating is only about 1,000 $1,500 off. And in order to get something cheaper than that, we have to go all the way down to the RTX 2070. So what if we got a 2070 Super instead? That would save us a few dollars. So then we would go in here, select video card if you want to replace the part, and we'll go over here and select 2070 Super, and then select one of these. The gigabyte version is on the top. We'll just add that. And now we're down to below 1100. So this is going to be, a build like this will be a little bit under the performance of the Series X, or what we think the Series X performance is going to be. And other things you might want to consider, whether or not you want to put in an optical drive. If you're gaming on PC these days, it's really a pain to have to put the disc in every time you want to play a game. And most games on PC are sold digitally these days anyhow. So optical drives have become a little bit obsolete for gaming computers. Of course, you'll need an operating system. And if you add Windows to this, it's going to be another $100. So that would bring you up to your 1100, 1200 range. So yeah, that's generally how I put PC builds together. I really liked digging into the hardware and seeing what's available and putting things together. And Review Tech USA likes to do that a lot too. So hopefully this was a helpful video for anyone who's trying to figure out how to build their own PC. I think the next time I will be here is when I go to stream Donkey Kong 64, because my Retro Tank is coming in on Monday. So until then, I'll see you all later.